Okay, so today we're looking at 3.6a, and then tomorrow we'll look at 3.6b. But in this section, I'm going to go to the next slide for just a second. In this section, we're still going to solve by substitution and elimination like we did a couple of sections ago. You'll see the difference is we've got 3 variables instead of 2. Now we also have 3 equations. If you have 3 variables, you need 3 equations. We're not going to do any of this complicated by these methods, but if you had 4 variables, you would need 4 equations. If you had, don't worry, I'm not going to give this to you, but if we had 12 variables, you would need 12 equations. So you'll see that the number of variables matches up with the number of equations. Now, this 3 variables is more complicated than 2, so today we're just going to focus on elimination. Tomorrow we'll go through, or in 3.6b, we'll go through and we'll look at substitution. Now, I wrote out your steps here. I think they'll make more sense once we've actually looked at a problem or two. But let me go ahead and read through these. Pause it for a minute if you need more time to write them down. You're going to take 2 equations and pair them together so that you eliminate a variable. Then you're going to write the 2 new equations as a system and solve those like we did back in 3.2 or whatever that section was. Then you'll plug those back into your equations to get the 3rd variable. Now I put a 4th one on here, which is check your answer. You don't technically have to check, and probably most of the ones that we do we won't actually check just for the sake of time, but there are lots of places to make mistakes on these, so you should be really careful. Check your work if you are not good at getting all of the details in place. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 or 3 of these. So here's the first one. Now what I'm going to go through and do is I'm just going to look at my variables and pick out which one would be easy to use elimination with. Now if I look at my z's right here, they're pretty good for elimination, because if I were to group these 2 equations together, the z's would cancel out. If I were to group this one with the last one, the z's would also cancel out. So pick which one eliminates well, and then what you're going to want to do is pair up your equations so that you've got 2 equations where elimination happens. Now that means 2 sets of equations where elimination happens. Now that means one of your equations you're going to have to use twice. So what I'm going to do is use 1 and 2. The z's will eliminate. Okay, and then 2. And then I'm going to group 1 and 3 here because the z's will also eliminate. Now I kind of feel like when I'm looking at this second one is going to be great for me, because look at how the y's eliminate too. That's nice. But you want to focus on one of the variables here. I focused on the z. Alright, so the z's eliminate. So when I add down, I have 3x plus 2y equals 15. And then same kind of thing here, but I lucked out. The y's cancel too. So I have 6x equals 18. I can actually solve here. X is 3. Now this is super lucky for me because I know x, so I'm just going to plug it in over there and get my y. Oops, I didn't actually plug my x in. That's not a good thing. Let me do that. So 9 plus 2y equals 15. Now I'll subtract my 9 over. Y is 3. Now, that's actually just a coincidence that my y is 3 here. That's just a coincidence that my y is 3 here is the same as the x. And then the last thing I'm going to do is plug my x and my y, I've got both of them now, into one of these equations and solve for the z. I'm just going to pick the first one. That's a really bad z. So I have 6 minus 3 plus z equals 4, or 3 plus z equals 4. I'll subtract my 3, z equals 1. Okay, so here are my answers. I'm going to write it as a xyz point. So 3 is the x, 3 is the y, 1 is the z. Now, in this class, in Algebra 2, we won't be graphing things in 3 dimensions, but that is something that mathematically you can do. We just don't know enough to do it. That's why we can write it this way, is this is the way that you write the name of a 3-dimensional point. Okay, so let's look at another one of these, one that's a little more complicated. Okay, so here I go. Now I'm going to look at this and same thing, I'm going to pick where my easiest elimination would happen, and I think it's right here with the y's. So I'm going to focus on those y's. So I'm going to group the first two because the y's would cancel out. Okay, here's the second one. Now I need one more set. I'm going to group the second two for the same reason, the y's would cancel. Now you'll notice that I have a total of 4 equations here, so some equation has to be in both of them. That's fine, but you do want to make sure that all 3 of your equations are used. If you don't use all 3 equations, you're going to end up going around in a circle. Okay, so my y's cancel and I have 3x plus 2z equals 11. Those cancel. 6x minus 2z equals 34. Okay, now this is great. What I've ended up with, I'm going to write them right here, is I ended up with 2 equations that have 2 variables. Here it's an x and a z. Depending on which equations, like what you canceled out and stuff, you might have different variables. What I'm going to go through and do is use these 2 little ones to solve for the x and the z. So these cancel, I'm doing elimination. 9x equals 45. X is 5. Okay, that's great. Plug that back into one of the 2. I'm going to pick this top one. So I have my x. So 15. I'm going to bring my 15 to the other side and divide by that 2. Okay, now I have my x, I have my z, I still need the y. To get my y, I'm going to plug it into one of these 3 equations. It doesn't matter which one. I'm just going to plug it into this top one right here, and I'll put this in a different color so it's easy for you to see right up here. So I have my x, I don't have my y, and I've got my z. And I'll go through and solve for y. So going through to do that, I've got -1 there. Add it to the other side. Y is 1. So here then's my answer. My x is 5. My y is 1. My z is -2. So there then is my answer. Lots of work on these. I'm not going to give you a ton for homework, a ton of problems, but do expect them to take a little while. Alright, so we're going to stop right there. You get better at these the more you practice, but just warning, you do not want to make little mistakes. if you make a little mistake right there, that little mistake is going to haunt you the whole rest of the problem. So be careful in those little mistakes. You'll be really glad that you were careful because it will save you a lot of grief. Alright, so this is 3.6a, 3 variables with elimination.